DJFG.
Life's good.
Hey, it's Diane, and we're back this week with another episode of the Now What podcast. I'm so excited to be here today with my co-hosts Antonio Moore and Lamont Gorman. We're going to focus this episode as a Juneteenth spotlight. And to commemorate this day, we're going to share the story of Black Wall Street.
In the early 20th century, a black middle-class community thrived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, despite segregation and Jim Crow laws.
Stay tuned for an upcoming episode around defunding the police following the protest of George Floyd, what exactly that means, and how do you get informed. In this Spotlight episode, we're going to discuss an event that isn't widely talked about in schools or the history books. And it's one of the worst episodes of racial violence. This is a story that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as the Tulsa Race Massacre. So Lamont, what exactly was Black Wall Street?
How's it going, Diane? Very glad to be here. Glad we're talking about the Juneteenth spotlight today, the Black Wall Street. So the Black Wall Street is a nickname of a historic district of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the 20th century, this district had one of the most prominent and affluent concentrations of Black African-American businesses in the entire United States. The Black Wall Street of 1921 consisted of entrepreneurs, attorneys, real estate agents, doctors, all offering their services to their neighborhood.
At that time, Greenwood had business.
Everything was happening there. We had the Dreamland Theater, we had drugstores, we had dance halls, pool rooms, shine parlors. That's where everybody just hung out.
Yeah, so LG, so why don't you share with the people why Oklahoma was selected as a place to build a city? Because it sounds like a odd place for people to go, especially people of color, to go and build a community.
So Greenwood could be considered what is known as a freedom colony or Freemanstown. As the name suggests, this community was built by former slaves emancipated during and after the Civil War. It was actually organized following Booker T's Washington's tour of Arkansas, Native American territories, and Oklahoma.
Booker T. Washington, who came through here en route to Muskogee, when he saw the glitter and glamour and the bustling businesses, he declared Greenwood as a Negro Wall Street of America. And since the Civil Rights Movement, we had updated it to the Black Wall Street of America.
So why Oklahoma? Well, a few different reasons. First one is post-slavery opportunity. The Oklahoma land rushes of 1889 and 1891 and continuing into 1907 when Oklahoma became a state, many slaves were looking for new opportunities. And they saw Oklahoma as a hope of change from the racial degradation and segregation known as Jim Crow. So Greenwood officially was formalized in 1906 and was very prosperous by the 1921 Race Massacre.
Wow, so people actually went there because they thought that they could, escape some of the Jim Crow laws of the South. So that's why they went to Oklahoma.
Yeah, that's correct.
The lure of Oklahoma in the late 1800s, even in the early 1900s, was clearly a better life for African Americans. There was an abundance of land. Everything was new, especially when we talk about pre-statehood.
So I find the Greenwood community and the Black Wall Street an interesting case considering the timing. Just 2 years from the Red Summer of 1919, where white supremacists inflicted violence and destruction on Black communities across Washington, Arkansas, Chicago, Omaha, and Virginia. How was Black Wall Street immune to those specific racial tensions?
Well, Diane, the short answer is they were not, just to the contrary. The white residents of Tulsa actually referred to the Greenwood area as Little Africa. Many were very jealous. We know this actually from some of the few surviving images of the Race Massacre. The surviving images themselves are very demonstrative of the hatred many residents of Greenwood actually experience by the broader white community. Most of the images actually that are available from a history perspective are documents that the white supremacists themselves used as advertisements, such as postcards, and they use these in recruitment. One particular one dated June 1st of 1921, so about 99 years from now, reads "Little Africa on fire, Tulsa race riot," with an image behind it of billowing smoke coming from buildings in the Greenwood community. One last thing, Diane, I want to mention is, though the postcard said race riot, Tulsa race riot, this was not a race riot, as those who tried to cover up the atrocious injustice may claim. It was actually a race massacre.
In less than 24 hours, a white mob reduces Black Wall Street to 36 square blocks of smoldering rubble.
All right, so Antonio, let's segue into that race massacre. What led to that 1921 Tulsa race massacre that we're talking about now? Is there a single event?
Absolutely. And again, it's always a pleasure to be here as well, Diane. One of the things that we need to recognize and understand is that this event, the Tulsa Race Massacre, did not happen in a vacuum. As Lamont points out, this was not a race riot. This was an attack on people. There are a few contributing factors that led to the Tulsa Race Massacre or the destruction of Black Wall Street. Lamont's already pointed out a few of these. Number one, let's just look at the atmosphere. It's 1921 America. There's racial and social and political tensions.
During this era, Tulsa is essentially two cities, the Black North End and the white South End.
And that was segregation days, you know. So we didn't go very far to the south.
The First World War had just ended in 1918. Many Black service members looking for work. Civil War was still a living memory for many. You think about how people are in love with their Confederate statues of today. Imagine that sentiment 100 years ago. Civil rights for the people who were disenfranchised were lacking. Ku Klux Klan was at an all-time height in popularity here in America.
The KKK had an enormous presence in Oklahoma and in Tulsa particularly.
Right. All of these things led to the destruction of Black Wall Street, right? Because this is the atmosphere. This is what's going on in America. Let's also talk about what LG spoke about, what Lamont spoke about was the jealousy.
Now, for some white people, a black person with any wealth, then as well as today, is something that created jealousy.
Because of the prosperity that this Negro town had gained, which brings us to an event. It's an encounter between a Black 19-year-old man. His name is Dick Rowland, worked as a shoe shiner, had an encounter with a young white elevator operator, female. Her name is Sarah Page. Rowland is using this elevator to access a Black bathroom at the top of the Drexel Hotel. Now, this is where things get murky. This is a 3-story hotel. The elevator goes from story 1. By the time it gets to story 3, there's a scream that can be heard. Police were summoned, thinking that there was some sort of an assault. Okay. After a brief interview, it's generally accepted that the police determined what happened between the two was not an assault.
So, Antonio, could Rowland and Page have known each other? I mean, they were very similar age working on Memorial Day.
The reality is there's no concrete evidence that that was the situation. However, One of the things that I will say that's kind of, it's reasonable to maybe assume that the two could recognize each other by sight. Maybe they knew each other.
He worked downtown, and during that era, the era of the riot, 1921, there was really only one restroom that was readily accessible to African Americans, and it was on an upper floor of a downtown building called the Drexel Building.
On Tuesday, May 31st, 1921, Rowland gets arrested at his mother's home in Greenwood. Of course, got newspaper coverage that starts. The Tulsa Tribune, a white-owned paper, has a headline that says, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator." Now, of course, this is 1921. This is the time where the mere accusation of a white woman being assaulted by a black man could be deadly.
As the story went around that he had touched her, hit her, knocked her to the ground, and it escalated and became more inflammatory with each telling.
Ultimately, things just steamrolled, totally out of control.
Around this time, this is where, the news of the community, they understand that Rowland has been picked up. He's at the jail cell. However, that is not enough for the city of Tulsa, the vigilantes, the people who are wanting street justice, people who are wanting sidewalk executions. They're starting to gather up. They call them lynch mobs.
By about 4 o'clock, you start to have a crowd of whites gathering in front of the courthouse, the downtown courthouse, where Dick Rowland was held. Over the next couple of hours, that crowd grows in size from 100 to 200 to 300 to 400 people.
Now, Rowland is a son of a prominent businessman in Greenwood. And so because his family is well connected, because his family wants him to be safe, they actually round up about 50 to 60 black men from the city of Greenwood.
African American men in Tulsa decided that it was time to take a stand, that lynching a 19-year-old black man for an alleged assault was going too far.
Now, by 10 p.m., what you have to understand is that you have more than 50 black men armed, protecting Rowland, and there is a lynch mob that approaches. At some point, one of the lynch mobs tries to disarm one of the black men standing guard. A shot was fired. And of course, this triggered an immediate response from the white crowd, who fired upon the blacks who were armed. And of course, they returned fire.
When the riot starts, many police officers abandon their duties. They side with the white rioters, deputizing many of them and detaining as many blacks as possible.
Black men were rounded up and taken to detention centers on the notion that that would be for their protection. But what that did was essentially to leave the black community defenseless.
We're taking you down, boy.
Yeah, no, I think something important you had mentioned in our pre-conference is for this mob, again, over 1,000 white men, the gentleman being in jail, arrested for the charge of an alleged assault was not enough justice for them. They were petitioning to the sheriff to release Rowland into their custody, for we know what they were going to do.
The situation in Tulsa quickly spirals out of control.
After those first shots were fired, at that point, the white rioters forgot about Dick Rowland entirely, and they were out to get all blacks for what they perceived as crimes against whites by blacks.
So Black Wall Street represented everything that America did not want. And I think that's what we're saying here. And so you had white men riding in on trucks with shotguns, shooting people, shooting at will, without disregard for man, woman, or child. You had airplanes Think about this for a second. Airplanes dropping firebombs on properties. This happened right here in America. Lives were lost. People were traumatized. A city was destroyed that never recovered.
So I think another point that's really interesting around this is the timing of when the Tulsa massacre occurred. This was a period where segregation had been legalized. Jim Crow, Black Codes, KKK were all in effect. African American people and people of color in general had little to no rights in terms of giving their votes, access to financial resources, or even a decent paying job. Black Wall Street represented everything that Jim Crow was designed to prevent. Now What is dedicated to topics and issues impacting the Black and Brown community, to elevate and empower our people, our voices, and our cultures. We hope today's episode inspired you to have a Now What moment. You can hear music inspiration for today's episode on the Now What Radio Spotify playlist. Thanks for listening, and remember, if you want to support what we do, then share, subscribe, and listen to us at nowwhatradio.com.